When it comes to positioning elements on a page, CSS has amazing support. CSS Flexbox and CSS Positioning are the two CSS features which are going to up your game when it comes to positioning elements on a web page. In the previous tutorial, we went over Flexbox, and I'm going to leave a link in the card above for those who are not familiar with working with Flexbox. Meanwhile, in this tutorial, we are going to learn about the power of its companion, which is CSS Positioning. With the mastery of CSS Flexbox and CSS Positioning, you can easily position and arrange elements on a web page. The CSS Position property can take any of these 5 values: static, relative, absolute, fixed, or sticky. The static value for the position property is the default value every HTML element has when the position property is not specified. And the static value for the position property just means that the elements are going to follow the normal document flow. That's for block elements that are going to be placed vertically, and they can be scrollable in case there's much content that fills the whole browser. For inline elements that are going to stack horizontally one after the other, and that's just the default flow of HTML block and inline elements. So in case you want to have some more advanced positioning and you need to explore the relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky positioning, which is what I explained in this tutorial. So we're going to look at relative positioning, which permits us arrange elements relative to their original position on the page. So you can move the elements by some small margin relative to their original position. We'll look at absolute positioning, in which the element is going to be given a property of position absolute, and you need to give any of its parents a property of position relative, such that that element can be positioned relative to any of those its parents. We're going to be looking also at position fixed, in which you can position an element at a fixed position on the page, so that even if you scroll on the page, the element remains at that fixed position. We're going to be looking also at position sticky, in which the element follows a normal document flow till it reaches a certain position which you have specified, and the element sticks to that position. So that's position sticky. At the end of the tutorial, we're going to be combining all what we have learned so far to modify the website we created in the Flexbox tutorial just a little bit. So we're going to make the navbar, which was not fixed position, to be positioned fixed in this case, such that the navbar stays at the top even when you scroll the content. In this pricing plan section, so we're going to add another pricing plan. We're going to make the plans to be arranged in this fashion, in which we have a card at the bottom, top, bottom, and top, and we're going to use relative positioning to achieve this. So that's it, guys, for this tutorial. I'm going to leave the code for all what I explained in this tutorial on my GitHub repo, so you can consult them if you need. Okay, I've gone ahead and opened the project here in VS Code, and here we just have our index.html. If you take a look at it, we just have the title here, relative positioning. We have our styles.css, which is this CSS which is open below here. Our styles.css is linked to the HTML, and I'm just going to be explaining this quickly. So what we have here is, in our body we have a container, and the container is what we have here. This container I've selected and I've given it this background color. So this is what we have at the right here. This is our container with this grayish background color, somehow grayish. Then our container has different children, and I've selected the children of the container here, and I've given them this background color, this aqua background color which we see. So our container has 4 children as we see here, and I've selected the 4 children with this selector, CSS selector. I've given them a fixed width and height, and giving them this background color we see here. And I use Flexbox to do this. So you notice that the container, I selected the container here with a display of flex. So when I give the container a display of flex, all your children are going to be placed horizontally. And we saw that in our previous tutorial on Flexbox, which I'm going to leave a link in the description and on the card above. So we justify the content to space evenly, so that it's going to be even spaced horizontally, separating the different elements. And we align the items to the center, so that they are placed at the center. When you look at it vertically, they are placed in the center. So that's Flexbox arranging these elements in the page. And talking of relative positioning of elements, now the default flow of elements is either horizontal or vertical, and the elements are placed on their normal positions in the HTML document. But let's say, for example, we want to just displace these elements a bit. Let's say we want this child 1 to be just a bit above its normal position, child 2 should go down, child 3 above, and child 4 should go down. So that's, we want to displace these elements relative to their original position by some small factors. And to accomplish that, you can easily do it using relative positioning in CSS, and we're just going to take a look at that. So to apply relative positioning, what you need to do is you have to select the element you want to apply the relative position to. So in this case, we want to select child 1 here first of all. So we're going to select child 1 dot child 1. So we're going to give it a position of relative. Since as we want to place this child 1 relative to its normal position, we want to displace it by some small factor. Notice that when you give a position of relative, nothing happens, but there are other properties you can apply to this: top, bottom, left, and right. Let's say we want to displace it by 10 pixels from the top. We are going to give it an attribute of top and a value of 10 pixels. 10 pixels. You now notice that child 1 has been displaced by this small factor, this small 10 pixels from the top, and it goes down a bit. We can apply the same styling to all the other elements. And you see that relative positioning can help us just display some elements from their normal positions by some small factor. So we can apply to child 2 in this case, child 2, and want to displace it. You see that when it displays from the top here by 10 pixels, but let's say we want to displace it from the bottom instead by 10 pixels. You notice that 10 pixels is given at the bottom and child 2 goes up. So we can do same for child TV and child 4. So we're going to give this one now child TV, and we're going to give this one child 4. So child TV will display CNC from the top. So you now notice that the elements are placed bottom, top, and it's because we are just using this relative positioning of 10 pixels to arrange the elements relative to their original positions. So another good thing with using relative positioning is the space of the element is going to be conserved. We know that by default, if child 1 is not given this relative positioning, if I comment child 1 for example, you notice child 1 normally has to be at the center of this container. So when we apply relative positioning, that moves child 1 by some factor. If we decide to move it from the top by let's say 100 pixels, you notice that child 1 leaves its parent completely, but the space which was occupied by child 1 is still conserved, and that's a good thing when you are using relative positioning. The spaces of all the elements are conserved, even if you move them completely out of their parent element. If you move them completely out of their parent element, their spaces are going to remain. So that's one good thing you need to take note, you can remember when working with relative positioning. So once more, a summary of relative positioning is used when you want to move elements by some small factor relative to their original position in the document flow. So take note, you have to move them by some small factor, because in case you want to use relative positioning and you move the element by a large factor, like you saw here 100 pixels from the top, notice that it breaks the document flow and it's going to cause some different issues. We can also move them from the left and right, and let's see if I give here top that and I give maybe left of let's say 10 pixels, or let's say 20 pixels, 20 pixels. You notice that in addition to being moved from the top by 10 pixels, let me increase the left to let's say 100 pixels so that it's clear. So you see that the element is moved from the top by 10 pixels, then it's moved from the left by 10 pixels. So you can apply top, bottom, left, right to these different the ways of positioning the element relatively. And I would also like to reiterate on the fact that the relative positioning property, or all the other positioning properties we are going to see, they must not be applied to elements in a flex box like I'm doing here. It can be applied to any element on the web page. For example, we can take this container which you see with this grayish background, and we can position it relative from its original position. We can move it by 100 pixels from the top so that it goes down. And to do that, I can give it position also of relative. Then I give it top of 100 pixels, top of 100 pixels, so that it moves it 100 pixels from the top. I noticed that this container, which was initially here, has been moved by 100 pixels from the top. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created this project and given it just a title of absolute positioning. So we have the title, we have the body here, and the body is simple. We have a paragraph, which is the direct child of the body, and we have another div. So we just have a paragraph, this paragraph, and we have this div, which are directly inside the body. So this paragraph just has some lorem ipsum, and in the div, which is in the body, I gave it a class of container in body to indicate that this container div is in the body. So in this div, which is in the body, we have another paragraph as well, similar to the previous, and we have another div in it. And this other div, which is in the previous container, I gave it a class of container in container. So this container is in this other container, and this other container is in the body. So that's why I gave them these names of classes. Then in this container, I gave it an h1 with web dev, mobile dev, and I gave it another paragraph as well. So if we just take a look at the styles.css, I just gave the body a background color of white. I gave that container, which is in the body, a background color of light pink, and the other container in it a background color of light green. So let me just move this styles.css to the left. So basically that's what I'm talking about. You see that I give this container the body we have here. I gave it a background color of white. This other container, which is in the body, meaning the paragraph is not included in the container. This container, which is in the body, I gave it this color of light pink, and the other container in that container, I gave it a background color of light green. Yeah, so we have the body, which has the background color of white, and in that body we have a paragraph. This is the paragraph you see here with the background color of white. Then in that body we have another div with a class of container in body, and that other div now has a paragraph in it as well, and it's the one we gave a background color of this light pink. Then we have a div as well inside this other container, which has a class of container in container. Then in that div, I gave it a color of light green, and in it we now have the h1, which is web dev, mobile dev, and we have the paragraph we have here. So you'll be asking, what's the function of absolute positioning? So in this case, we see that we have this h1 web dev, mobile dev in this green div here, and let's say we want to position this h1 inside this light pink div, and we also like to position it inside the body, which has this background color of white. So we want to be able to position this h1, and you notice how things are nested. The h1 is inside this container div, and this container is inside this body, this container in the body, and this container in the body is also now inside the body element. So we want to be able to position this h1, which is a child of these other divs, at any level. So since as a child of this div, a child of this div, and a child of this other div, we can position it inside these other divs relative to the different divs. So what we'll do is we are going to come to our HTML, and if we say position, let's say by default we can position this heading, this h1, we can position it inside this pink container div, as well as we can position it inside the body using relative positioning. So as we saw in the previous tutorial, we saw relative positioning, and relative positioning just helped us position the element relative to its initial position. So we can give a bottom of a certain value that is going to move this h1 above to this other div, and we can increase the bottom value so that it moves to this other div. But as we saw with relative positioning, the space which is occupied by this h1 is going to be conserved, and relative positioning is not good when you want to move elements to further positions. We want to move elements by a high factor because the space they occupied is conserved and the HTML document does not look good. So let's use the relative positioning first of all before I use absolute positioning, so that I clearly see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to select the H1 here, and I'm going to position it relative. I'm going to give it a position of relative. So I've given it a position of relative. You notice that the space it occupies is still conserved and nothing has changed. So let's say I want to move this H1 to this div that's the pink color. I can give it a bottom value. I can give it a bottom of, let's say, 200 pixels. I just tested that. And you see that if I give it a bottom value of 200 pixels, it's moved from its initial position to the top of this other pink div. But you notice that the space that was occupied by that H1 is still kept here. So it's not good to use relative positioning when you want to move an element far, given that the space is still going to be conserved. I could as well give it a value of, let's say, TV 100, and let's say maybe TV 160 pixels. And you see that the H1 is moved by, from the bottom, is giving 360 pixels to the bottom, and is moved from its initial position relative to its initial position. 360 pixels has been added to the bottom, and it has been moved to this other div. So it's now at the top here. But you notice that the space that was occupied by that H1 is still conserved here, and that's not good for this use case. So we want to use now another concept known as absolute positioning. With absolute positioning, once you position an element absolutely, the space it occupies disappears. So the document behaves as if that element space was not there, or that element did not exist. And the way I'm going to demonstrate that is, I'm going to comment this H1, and you take a look at how the document looks. So you notice that when I comment this H1, the space here is even. This space and this space is the same, and it's the same value here. So you notice that that's the space here and the space here is the same. That's how the element is going to look like when the H1 does not exist. If I uncomment it, you notice that there's high space here, because when you use relative positioning, the space that is kept by the element stays. So if I use absolute positioning, you are going to notice that this space is not going to exist. So if I position item 1, let me say I position this H1 absolutely, I give it the position of absolute, you notice that the element behaves as if this H1 did not exist, because you notice that the space that is here and the space that is here is equal. So that's the advantage of using absolute positioning. The element is completely taken out of the document flow, and the document behaves as if that element didn't exist. So if I want to position now this H1 inside this other div, and another thing using relative positioning, absolute positioning, you are going to see that it's very easy. All I have to do is I have to give the container I want to position. Since as I want to position it in this light pink div, I just need to give this parent container a position value, a position of relative, and I give the H1 I want to position absolutely into the relative parent. I give it a top value of 0 pixels. So you notice that the element directly moves into this parent. So that's how easy it is to position an element using absolute positioning. So you see that you need to give the element you want to position absolutely, in this case H1, a position of absolute. I need to take note that this H1 has to be a child of the parent you want to position it absolute to. So the H1 is a child of this pink container, which is this one. So it's a child of this container in the body. It's actually the pink container in body. So it's actually a child of it, and that's why you can apply now this position relative to its parent. Once you apply position relative to its parent and you give it a position of absolute, you give it a top of 0, mean you want to position it from the top, 0 pixels from the top. The element is directly placed in it, 0 pixels from the top. You can do the same to the body. If I take position relative and I apply on the body position relative, you notice that this H1 moves to the top of the body, so it's directly placed in the body, 0 pixels from the top. So you see that absolute positioning is very easy to position elements relative to their parents, and it's good in cases where you want to move an element far away from its parent. You know the exact position in the parent element where you want to place a child component. You can easily place it there. You just specify absolute on the element you want to position. The position relative to a particular element. In this case, The body, which is the white, we are positioning 0 pixels from the top. You can position it in this other container, which is light pink, 0 pixels from the top, by just giving this position relative. You can as well position it, leave it on its initial position, and you see that it's positioned there. So with position relative, it's very easy to position these elements. I notice that the element behaves as if it never existed in the HTML document when you use position absolute. So once more, a summary of position absolute. You have an element you want to position absolutely in an HTML document. That element has to be a child of some parent element you want to position relative to. So it can be nested in parent components. There's no problem. The only issue is the element you want to position absolutely has to be a child of some other element you can position the element relative to. So you come to your CSS, you give the element a position of absolute. Then you specify from which direction you want it to be positioned. In this case, we are saying that from the top of a particular element, make it 0 pixels from the top. What does that mean? It means you can select the body, which has a pink background color, and say that position this element 0 pixels from the top of this element. And the way you do that is you specify the relative value of, you specify the element with a position of relative. So you specify that this parent, this child, which is absolutely positioned, should be positioned relative to this parent by 0 pixels from the top. That's why we have this 0 pixels from the top here. You can as well specify to any other element. Mean you can put it as well in the body and say position this h1 absolutely to this is relatively positioned parent by 0 pixels from the top. And you notice that the h1 is going to be positioned there 0 pixels from the top. And you must not use only top, you can use bottom, left, right. So you can give a left as well. Let's see, you can use a left as well. Let me give you the left value. You can give a left as well, or let's say even 200 pixels. I notice that it's going to be shift to the left by 200 pixels. So that's just how you can use 100 pixels. It's going to be shift to the left by 100 pixels. You can use top, bottom, left, right, and so you can just use any of top, bottom, left, right here to move the element inside the relatively positioned parent. So another thing you need to remember also is that if you don't specify the parent which is relatively positioned, it's going to basically just consider that is the body element that you are positioning it relative to. And we know that the body element and the HTML element are basically the same things, because the body is the only child inside the HTML. So if you don't specify the parent element you want to position the element which is absolutely positioned relative to, is going to consider the body, meaning that if I comment this, there's going to basically be no difference. See that if I comment the position absolute here, it's going to just consider now relative to the HTML document, which is just a bit that's out of the body element. Not out of the body element is the HTML element. So if you take away position relative from the body, it's going to consider that I want to position this element which is absolutely positioned relative to the HTML element. So it's going to place it at the top. So that's how you specify absolute positioning. And if there is anything you didn't understand, I'm going to leave this code in my GitHub repository so that you can clone it or download the code and play around with it and get a clear understanding of what absolute position is all about. Absolute position is actually one of the most complicated positioning properties to understand, but once you get a hang of it, it becomes very easy. Okay, for fixed positioning, I've gone ahead and opened and created a folder here with the code. So we have our index.html and we have styles.css with the styles linked to our HTML here in the link HTML element. So we just have a title here, fixed positioning, which is this fixed positioning here. Then we have our head, that's in the head, sorry. Then the body, now we have enough, which is our nav bar you see here, and I've applied some styles to it. And after that, we have some paragraph now with some lorem ipsum, some much lorem ipsum text here. So basically, we can have just some content here, the normal content of our HTML page. But the general idea is we are going to have our navbar and we are going to have some content below it in a typical website, on a typical web page. So what happens is the flow of the HTML. If we come to our styles.css, you see that I've just applied some styles to the nav HTML element, the UL and the E element. I've just applied some styles so that we have this nav bar. I was basically styling everything so that we can have a nav bar like we see here. So what happens is on a normal web page or a normal website, you notice that the navbar has to be fixed at the top. Means when the user scrolls, you want the navbar to stay at the top, and that functionality is provided by the fixed positioning, which is the next type of positioning we'll be seeing in this case. So you notice that when the user scrolls, since as the normal flow of HTML documents is from top to bottom, all the elements are going to move from top to bottom, and as you scroll, elements that are at the top, you will almost see them if the content cannot fill the page. So you need to scroll to see the other content at the bottom. But let's say you want this navbar to stay fixed at the top. You don't want that when the user scrolls, the navbar disappears. You want the navbar to stay fixed at the top. Well, that's very easy to accomplish using fixed positioning. So what you do is you are going to come to your navbar in the index.html. See that this is the navbar, all this, and directly below the navbar is a paragraph that starts here with lorem ipsum. So all this lorem ipsum below here is the text paragraph that is below the navbar. So if you want to make this navbar to get fixed, to be fixed at the top, you are going to come to the navbars selector, and this can apply to any element you want to stay fixed on your HTML page. You come to the element selector, in this case it's our navbar, and you give it a position of fixed. So if you give it a fixed position, notice that the navbar is going to stay fixed at this position. If as the user scrolls, the navbar stays fixed at the top. But you want the navbar to be fixed from the top, which is in this case the HTML document. You want it to be fixed 0 pixels from the top. So you are going to give it a top value. As we saw with the other position properties, you can apply top as well to fix positioning. I can give you a top value in this case of 0 pixels. So that is fixed 0 pixels from the top. So you see that you no longer have that space that was at the top of the navbar, and that's fixed there. But you want the navbar to fill up the full space in the browser. And the reason the navbar misbehaves once you give it a position of fixed, you notice that initially when you just had the position of fixed, it's misbehaving. There's some space here and it does not fill up all the space. It's because the navbar is taken out of the document flow, and because it's taken out of the document flow, it's no more going to behave the way you expect it to behave. So you need to give it this position top of 0 pixels so that it's close to the top, no spacing from the top. I want it to fill up this space here, so you are going to give it a width of 100%. So that is 100% of its parent. So give it a width of 100%. And now you notice that the navbar fills up 100% width and 0 pixels from the top. So if the user now scrolls here, you notice that the navbar stays fixed as it scrolls. So that's a good application of the position fixed property. And you can position any element on your web page fixed. It must not be a navbar. Any element you want that should not move on the page as you scroll, you can use a position of fixed. And you notice that you can position it left, top, bottom. So it means it must not be only top. You can give it a left value as well. So you can combine these different values of, let's say, maybe 30 pixels. So that it starts 30 pixels from the left. Notice that it's going to give some 30 pixels from the left, and it's going to stay fixed. You can give it even a top value of a different top value, let's say maybe even 300 pixels. And notice that it's going to stay fixed at this position, 300 pixels from the top when you scroll. So that's how position fix works, and you can combine these different values and use different position fix values to get the layout you want. So the next CSS positioning property we are going to be looking at now is the position sticky. So position sticky is used in cases where you want a particular element to flow by default with the normal document flow, but at a certain point in time you want the element to stop at a certain position. And I'm going to be demonstrating this with this code we have here. So we have our index.html and we have our styles.css. In our index.html, we just have an h1, which is the h1 we see here, your task. And in that h1, we have different paragraphs. So we have many paragraphs in this h1, and these paragraphs are what we see here. And I've just styled them by giving them some border radius around them, giving them some border radius, some border color, and some padding around them of 10 pixels. And there's a particular paragraph which I call the priority paragraph. And this priority paragraph is a paragraph which has the span, and it has a span in it called, I've named it attend to this right now. So it means among all these different tasks that the user has to do, there's a particular task the user has to attend to right now, and it's a priority task. So I gave it this paragraph class priority. So if we come to our CSS, you see that the span in the priority, I just gave it a background color of red and I increased the font size. So what I want to do with sticky positioning is, I want that when this user scrolls through his different tasks, the task which is the priority task should not, the user should not just be able to scroll and pass the priority task as we see in this case. I want this task to stay at the top. So when the user scrolls and this task reaches at this level, it should stick to the top of the browser, and the user should be able to scroll through the other tasks, but he should be able to have a view of this his priority task at the top. So we are going to see how sticky positioning is going to work here, and the way I'm going to accomplish that, what you have to do is you have to give this the paragraph which is the priority paragraph. In this case, we see that is this paragraph with the class of priority. So we are going to select this paragraph and make it to be sticky, give it a position of sticky. So I'm going to select the paragraph. So it's dot priority in this case, priority. So select that paragraph and I'm going to give it a position of sticky. So when I give this paragraph a position of sticky, I'm going to say let it stick to the top at 0 pixels from the top of the browser. So I'm going to give it a top, as we saw with the other position properties. I'm going to give it a top of 0 pixels. So what you notice now is the user is going, when he scrolls through his different tasks, the task that has the priority is going to stick at the top. So you see that as he scrolls through the different tasks, the one that has the priority stays at the top, such that he knows that he has to attend to this task right now. And to make this look a lot better, I can give it a background color. Let me just give it a background color of, let me say aqua in this case, just any background color. So you see that this user sees this priority task, and as he scrolls through his different tasks, the priority task is sticky at the top at 0 pixels. And what does that mean? It means by default the element is going to follow the normal document flow, but once this paragraph hits a value of 0 pixels from the top, it's going to stay at 0 pixels from the top. So it's going to stick at 0 pixels from the top, even though he scrolls through the other elements. And it's just like a reminder for the user. And you see that the use case is pretty clear. For cases of notifications and items we want to be normally in the document flow but stick at a particular value, that's the use case for the position sticky. So you can use left, right, and you can combine those different values. So you can select, instead of being sticky at 0 pixels, you can say be sticky at let's say 50 pixels from the top. So you see that when you scroll on, it's about 50 pixels from the top. So you see that this space here is 50 pixels. So let's take a clear look at an application of the different CSS positioning on this website on this web page we created in a previous tutorial when we were learning about Flexbox. So presently we have the web page and we have the navbar, and the navbar is not fixed at the top. Notice that when you scroll, the navbar disappears, and we also have these different cards which are just positioned horizontally. We want to apply some relative positioning to make the cards be positioned in an up down fashion. So basically this is what we want to have as a result. So you see here that the navbar is now fixed at the top, and when I scroll, the navbar stays at the top and the content slides below the navbar. And these cards now, I added a third card, a fourth card. So here there are three cards, and here I added a fourth card, and here you notice that we have the cards in a bottom top fashion. So that's just application of fixed positioning here and application of some relative positioning here. So if we head back to our code, and it seems this tutorial was already getting too long, so I'm going to just briefly explain what I did. So I added this fourth card here, professional card, because in our previous tutorial there were only three cards. So in this tutorial I added the fourth card here with the name professional card. So initially the cards just had these classes of plan item and starter. This other one had silver, this one had professional, and this one had gold. So what I did is I added these classes of relatively up, relatively down, relatively up, and relatively down. So when I add these classes of relatively up and relative down is to indicate which cards are going to be up and which cards are going to be down. Means I added relatively down to these two cards and I added relatively up to these other two cards. So after giving these different card divs the classes of relative up on some of the cards and relative down on some of the cards, what you need to do is you come to your CSS and you select the class, the relative up class, give it a position of relative, and since as you want to move it from the top by 15 pixels, you put a top of 15 pixels, so it's going to move it relative from its initial position by 15 pixels from the top. And on the other hand, you select the relative down class and you apply relative, a position of relative, and position it relative, give it a bottom of 15 pixels so that it gives you that 15 pixels, and you are going to get these cards in this order of down, up, down, up. So you have the two cards that is selected with the relative up class and style them relatively, and you have the other two classes that is selected them relative down and style them relatively. And for the navbar, to get the fixed navbar, what you do is in your code you need to select the navbar as we saw in the previous slide where we were explaining position fixed. In this case, you have to make the navbar to be fixed. So what you do is you are going to give it a position of fixed for the navbar. When you give it a position of fixed, the navbar is going to shrink and is going to leave the flow of the document. So what you need to do is you have to give it a top of 0 so that it's positioned fixed to the top and there is no space from the top and the navbar. Then what you do after that is you give it a width of 100% so the navbar fills the whole space as we saw in the previous slide. So you are going to end up now with this web page where the navbar is fixed at the top and you have the cards in this manner. So that's it guys for this tutorial, and if you know you got value from this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button at the bottom right, and I'm going to release more tutorials like this in the future, so consider subscribing to this channel to get this kind of tutorials. Leave a like as well if you enjoyed the video, and if you have a comment or if you have any incomprehension, just leave a comment below and I'm going to respond to you as quick as possible.